Welcome everyone to The Spoken Nerd. I'm your host Connor McDonald. The guest today probably is a name almost synonymous with the name of Oracle. Rumor has it he was born in the Oracle offices as a toddler, wrote the buffer cache with just blocks painted with zeros and ones. And without further ado, Dom Giles, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Connor. That's a very interesting introduction. So, born in the Oracle womb, as it were. Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I have to admit, normally, to set my guest at ease, I'll normally sort of wax lyrical about current events and things that would typically be in common between people of two different geographies. And the natural one obviously would normally be cricket or something like that. But given that England just won the World T20 Cup and the
you don't want to talk about it,
and the Aussies didn't even make the final cut.
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was brilliant, wasn't it? It could only have been better if it had actually happened in the UK and you'd had to come all the way over here to lose, as opposed to us going all the way over there to win.
Indeed.
But yeah, it was pretty good.
And that's enough about world events. Now, normally when I have a guest on the show, I'll go trolling through LinkedIn in a way of finding out their background, seeing what's going on, going through their experiences, etc. And so I jumped onto your LinkedIn and it has joined Oracle. That is the most boring LinkedIn profile ever. There was a hint there of IBM graduate programmer.
That's right, yeah. I joined IBM as a graduate. Worked on OS2. That tells you something, right? You don't even remember OS2, right? I worked in Hursley Labs on the PM, presentation manager front end for OS2. And I was there on the day that Microsoft and IBM split parts and Windows as it is now was started, and OS2 took a bit of a death blow at that stage when half the Microsoft employees who were working with me walked out of the office and the other IBM staff sat down and went, what on earth is going on? So yeah, I was there on that day. And it wasn't long after that I actually went back to university and then started at Oracle. Yeah. And it is very boring, isn't it? Incredibly boring.
Did you ever work on OS2 Warp? I remember we were an OS2 customer back in the day.
So that was, yeah. I mean, I was a very early day. So I was there for the launch party of OS2. And so all of that sort of stuff, again, was very, very early days. So one of my jobs as a graduate was to go through and compile the OS2, which was done on state-of-the-art 486 CPUs at that time, which still took us about 12 to 20 hours to compile the OS2 code. And then I had to transfer it onto floppy disks. And there was about 30 of them that I had to basically stick in and copy, and then had to make multiple copies and distribute them to the various teams as an install test. So yeah, it wasn't, when we talk about OS2, it wasn't a glorious days for me at the OS2 labs. It was interesting, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say I was doing anything that was cutting edge at that stage. It was very much what you would expect to see for a junior programmer in any software development organization.
Although I will talk up OS2. I remember I was working at BHP in those days, and I was a COBOL programmer. PCs were just starting to sort of become fledgling things, and we had Lotus 123, the predecessor of Excel, and I think we had Windows 3 or maybe Windows 3 for work groups, or maybe even just MS-DOS. Even in those days, spreadsheets were the database, as they are nowadays. I always tell people Excel is the number one database in the world. In those days, Lotus 123 was, and we had some spreadsheets that were so big and complicated. MS-DOS couldn't open them. Windows 3 for workgroups couldn't open them. And we had our one machine, an IBM 386, because that was the absolute bleeding edge, and had OS2 on it, and it could open. It could open this one particular spreadsheet that's pretty much like every company, multi-billion-dollar company, but if you lost that one spreadsheet, you were toast. And so, that was the spreadsheet.
And the irony was that IBM OS2 was way ahead of any operating system at that stage. And it always, I think all of us, IBM, and when I was at IBM, it's making me sound like I was a long-term employee of IBM. I was there for like 12 months as a graduate. The funny thing is, even then, we all knew that OS2 was far better than anything else in the industry, far better than anything else in the industry at that stage. But yeah, it was astonishing to us to think that Microsoft would want to go back to what turned into Windows 3.1 over the power of OS2. But it just shows you, right? It's like VHS and Betamax. It doesn't really matter how good your solution is. It's all about marketing. It's all about the actual presence inside of the marketplace And the simple things, if you have luck with a solution like Lotus 123 at that stage and you have the right software, and that's what moves the market. So yeah, it was interesting times. I learned an awful lot at that stage from some very, very smart people who worked inside of IBM at that stage, who, even as a graduate, and I'm incredibly grateful for the people inside of IBM and my manager at that time, who basically, told me that IBM wasn't the place for a young, bright graduate programmer, and that I should start looking at other alternatives. And that's from that point, I started looking around. And whilst my background, oddly enough, wasn't in databases, my background was in 3D graphics, oddly enough. My thesis was on solid 3D graphic rendering, which was embed textures, so Perlin noise at that time. Was it Perlin noise? But it was certainly noise generation functions for solid 3D texturing. So to actually come to databases, it's a big leap.
It's similar. I have a similar experience in the sense that my honours paper was in robotics, and I opted to not do the database unit so I could do the robotics. And that classic thing where at university they tell you that everything that's a little bit niche is going to be the future, is going to be the mainstream. And then, of course, you go get your first job and they go, do you know COBOL? And I went, no. And they went, well, you're about to learn. And I'm like, what about robotics? And they went, forget robotics. Start learning COBOL.
Well, oddly enough, it was different for me, right? When I joined Oracle, and I was very grateful. Oddly, I joined Oracle as a bet at the time. My friend bet me that I couldn't get a job with Oracle, because Oracle at that stage was very much the young, up-and-coming company. It was very hot. Everyone wanted to join Oracle at that stage, and we had a bet that either of us couldn't get the job. And of course, he didn't even bother turning up for the interview, and I did, and it all changed from there. But oddly enough, when I joined, they started very much the same sort of thing. It was just like, do you know forms? And I started doing some forms coding, and then the conversation turned to, we had a problem that couldn't be solved inside of PL SQL, and it involved crunching a whole load of financials. At the time, it's just financials was coming online just at that stage. It needed to be crunched, and I did it in C. And when they found out I could develop in C, I was moved out of Oracle Forms and into Oracle development in a payroll. So Oracle Payroll was at that stage, and that's when my development career started. So yeah, it all comes around. So whilst I wasn't using much of my C skills when I started, I certainly moved back into that in my early days inside of Oracle.
So continuing on the DOM origin story, we hear the terms nowadays Gen Z, Gen X, Gen this, Gen that, millennial, etc. I prefer the term Gen version, which is we associate people's IT careers with the particular Oracle release. I was an Oracle 6 baby. What Oracle baby were you?
I was Oracle 5, just on the transition cusp to Oracle 6. And for most people, that doesn't mean very much unless you've actually been in Oracle a long time. But the jump from Oracle 5 to Oracle 6 was a particularly brutal period for organizations and, for indeed inside of Oracle. As we went from what it becomes Oracle 5, which was a great database in my world, to what was a real transformational version of the database, which was Oracle 6. But it was difficult, doing those initial migrations from 5 to 6, migrating what in some instances were relatively small databases by today's standards, but were pretty big when all the tools that you had at that stage were quarter-inch tape or floppy disks, and you were very limited in terms of disk storage and memory to do very complicated migration processes from 5 to 6. And it was really, as you say, the generation that changed the database industry, that 5 to 6 period, because it was also a generation in terms of changing the guard in terms of hardware as well. The old guard of VMS and IBM MVS and VM were all changing over to the new generation of Sequent and Pyramid operating systems, and Sun were all on the rise at that stage. And so that basically meant that we had new players in town. And it basically meant that we had that opportunity to grow as a database company alongside of the change in terms of hardware as well. So yeah, I was very much a transition child from 5 to 6, along with the transition from VMS to Unix operating systems, which was all I really knew. So I felt very comfortable, very much like the Gen Z today with their TikTok world and everything else, which is slightly alien to me. I'm fairly sure if you came from the IBM mainframe world at that time, the Unix kids coming in with their C code and fancy ideas about how to actually build systems that felt very unnatural too.
I'm doing a talk Oracle versions tomorrow in my office hours, and we're talking about storage. Someone's asked like, what kind of storage do they get? So I do a bit of a history there, and it's funny how we used to pay on the mainframe. We used to pay, I think it was the last I checked, we used to pay about $150 per gigabyte per month. Like you never owned the storage, you rented it. I remember when our first Oracle product we were running on Sun, the Sun Spark 10, 40 megahertz CPU, fantastic. But I remember we had the old wide SCSI disk, which I think it was a 3 gigabyte disk pack, and you paid about $5,000 for it. And we were like blown away that you pay for it and you owned it. It was yours. And like, wow, 3 gigabytes. We thought we will never, ever fill 3 gigabytes.
We use 3 gigabytes. Kids these days don't know how old they actually are, right? I mean, it was like, I did see when I was trolling through Twitter, and that's another story. So I was trolling through Twitter yesterday, and I did see a picture of, the first large scale mainframe being moved into, I can't remember which building it was inside of the UK, and then someone holding up, a Raspberry Pi W right next to exactly the same entrance, and just and actually framed it perfectly in terms of where the computer was actually being moved in before. We've come such a long way in a relatively short period of time, and even in my limited career inside of the IT industry, it does feel like things have moved on so much. And it's been fantastic to be involved with some of those companies over that period of time, both inside of IBM, Oracle, and Google, indeed.
That's true. I chuckle because, as you know, one of the things I have to do nowadays is produce video for my role. And I've just clocked over, I think, the 25 terabyte mark at home here. I'd love to say that's beautifully well organized in a big disk pack, but no, it's like 12 external drives piggybacked onto each other, etc. But that's, it's homegrown. It's homegrown.
Yeah, I'm very much more a cloud person. In the cloud I trust, and I may come a full fell on that at some stage in future, but in the cloud I trust, and so I have very little of that infrastructure in my room. I think I've got one external hard drive, which at this point I think it's only a terabyte in size as well, which I use for local backups, and that's it. So I'm in a completely different world to you.
So you mentioned you went from payroll to financials and then into C program. Your early roles at Oracle, when you headed into that space, were you like actually working on the product? Is that, or like the database product, or?
In my early days, I was working on Oracle payroll as it was then. So we were writing the code and then running the Oracle internal payroll run. And my early days, Dave Enser and those sort of guys, my contact with people who don't know Dave Enser, as he was one of the most important database tuning experts at that time. I mean, you must.
I knew Dave very well.
Everyone's. And so I remember, working with Dave, sitting down inside of his office, and we were trying to optimize the Oracle payroll SQL just to actually get the payroll done in less than 2 days, 2 or 3 days, as it were, at that stage. And so that was my first experience with the internals of the Oracle. So I was very much at that stage involved in Oracle apps, and which feels very strange saying it now, because my involvement with Oracle apps since then has been really, just as a user, not as a developer inside of the space. But I spent the first, I'd say, year and a half, maybe 2 years, working in Oracle apps. And so my engagement with the database only really came in terms of performance tuning on the Oracle database. And after I spent some time in that area, I moved out of, oddly enough, Oracle development and back into pre-sales. And was brought back into pre-sales to work with some of our larger customers on, oddly enough, database tuning. So then the next 10 years of my career in Oracle was spent with some of Oracle UK and EMEA's largest customers on fixing their big performance problems. And I was, relatively junior at that stage, but we spent most of our time doing benchmarks and database tuning. So lots of interesting work inside of that space. But so educational. I learned so much in such a short period of time about not just about databases, but the way the operating system works, the way that people respond to changes in the differences that performance makes to a business process. And that's, again, we tend to always ignore that. Especially some of our database performance tuning experts tend to regard it as, what's the latency? How fast is the query actually reduced in a period of time? What we don't really see it, certainly if you're working in development or have only ever worked in database tuning, is the impact it can actually make to the business in terms of going from 12 hours down to 40 minutes, and can save an unbelievable amount of money to an organization. If they can run that process 4 times where they're only able to run it once basically means they can, be more productive, more flexible, more engaging with the various pressures they actually have as an organization. So that 10 years I actually spent in pre-sales was so important to everything that I actually learned and bring to, I think, what is database development, but it was incredibly important.
I want to stress to listeners that Dom's not being paid here, because the paragraph he just said pretty much reiterates exactly my topic at SQL tuning I gave at CloudWorld just gone, where I said my 5 steps of SQL tuning, and step 1 was step away from the SQL and focus on the customer experience. So I just want to stress to listeners, Don was not preempted to say that.
I didn't. Oddly enough, and the comment, and this, don't take this badly, I had no idea that that was the theme of your presentation, or Cloud as well. I now will go back and view the video.
That's right, and I'll send you that £20 as we promised. It's funny, you mentioned Dave Ensor, and for those that don't know Dave Ensor, he was probably globally the best well-known of that time in terms of database experts, and sadly passed away recently after a long illness. It's funny you say you learned so much from him in terms of education. I've told this story before, but I'll repeat it for the benefit of podcast listeners. I pretty much owe my entire career, I think, to Dave, because I was working for a large mining company in Australia, and because it was just one of Australia's largest companies, we just started using Oracle. But it's that terrible, I'm almost ashamed to say, it's all about ego. When you're working for one of the biggest companies in Australia, you think, well, then by definition, I'm doing things right. And so we had an Oracle database, and we thought we were the bee's knees. In those days, client server was touted to be the future, and we just started doing client server, and we thought we were fantastic. And Oracle had managed to bring out Dave. Now that Oracle customers were starting to proliferate in Australia, they made a big deal. They said, we're going to bring out Dave Ensor, who I think had just at the time switched to BMC, to come out and do some talks for Oracle customers. And he gave a talk, the 20 mistakes you're probably making with your Oracle database. And I went along, with my very big head. And as I ticked off 18, I think, or maybe even 19 of the 20, I thought, maybe I need to start learning a little bit more. And that got me involved. Funny enough, I thought, well, being in Australia, we didn't really have a strong user group sort of focus. And so I thought, how do I learn more? And I discovered Usenet, or the use groups, Deja News in those days. And there was a guy that used to hang out there all the time named Tom Kite. Lots of questions.
Good old Tom.
And it's funny, bringing that circle full round, like about 15 years later, BMC, it might have been BMC, held a competition where if you wrote an essay, if they selected your essay, you got a free trip to OpenWorld. And being in Australia, I thought I'll never be able to afford to go to OpenWorld as an attendee. And so I entered this competition and was fortunate enough to win. I didn't know it at the time, but the prize was, a trip to OpenWorld and an attendance badge. But also they said, and you get to have a dinner with our anonymous judges. Oh, great. So I go along, and the anonymous judges were Dave Ensor and Tom Kite.
Oh, wow.
And so it was this great thing. It was the first time I met them in person. And I have to admit, I lost touch with Dave some years ago because after he moved into the legal profession. But certainly Tom, ultimately, I ended up, what I do now, asktom.oracle.com. So yeah, it's an interesting bringing the circle all the way around. But certainly if I hadn't gone to that thing where I learned to get a bit of humility and tick off the 19 mistakes, I probably would have been not so much an Oracle person.
And it is one of those things. And, Tom had many meals with Tom as well. But one of the things that I learned, and I think I learned probably too late in my career, and that says a lot, I think, is that you don't know how little you know until you meet someone who knows just a little bit more than you. And the difference with Dave Ensor and Tom Kite, it wasn't that they knew just a little bit more than you. They knew so much more than you. And of course, it's any ego you have, you just need to leave at the door. Certainly with those two, and many others as well. And I think that's the other thing that you tend to forget, is that you can stumble across. I mean, everyone knows Tom Kite, or certainly in the Oracle community, everyone knows Tom Kite. And probably if you don't know Dave Ensor, he's certainly a hero to the heroes of you in some respects. But you can always meet that one person who is quiet and quietly spoken, who knows all of the things that you really should know. And I know certainly any career advice I could give anyone else, look for that sort of person. Look for the person who's quiet, who gets on with their job, who does it well, and delivers the results, and sit down and try and figure out what you can learn from them, because you can push yourself so much further just on the back of those small giants. And those are the ones you really want to focus on, the small giants of the IT industry.
And that's why I consider myself so lucky, because I literally stumbled across it. It was just pure luck.
Yeah, lucky you. Lucky you, because incredible. I mean, what a dinner to basically have Dave Enser and Tom Kite. I can only imagine the copious amounts of alcohol who were drunken during that meal.
Moving on to 10 years in pre-sale,
Yeah.
which means during that time you would have seen a whole stack of different Oracle versions,
Yeah.
and either major versions or patch sets, etc.
Yeah.
It's funny, I wrote a blog post recently where I said, I'm sick and tired of everyone saying Oracle 7 was the best version. If you're on version N, you generally view version N-1 with rose-tinted glasses. And so my blog post pointed out all the things I said, do you want to move a data file? Well, you're taking your system offline. Max extents. Nah, I didn't get that, etc. In your time at Oracle, there's obviously been some releases that probably were really transformational to the company.
Yeah.
You've already mentioned Oracle 6.
Yeah.
In terms of the versions you've sat through or been custodian of to some degree, what do you reckon have been the real landmark releases, and what do you reckon the ones that maybe should never have seen the light of day?
Well, I mean, Oracle 6, everyone, it was that inflection point in many ways for the whole database industry. In my world, certainly. I think it was important for lots of organizations. And so I always hold that one with special. It launched my career. I think it was important for so many other organizations who are transitioning from hierarchical databases into the relational world. You can't knock that. For me, I think it was moving through Oracle 9, oddly enough, and I know it's not spoken enough because it definitely had its problems. But again, for me, Oracle 9, I think, was the launch of technologies like real application clusters. And, I know you can talk about PL SQL and you can talk about partitioning, but in many ways, I think real application clusters still stands as the pinnacle of Oracle engineering, data engineering, because it solves so many problems for customers. And so for Oracle 9, the early days of Oracle 9, as we were moving from, we had some form of distributed database and a shared everything architecture, but it was really Oracle 9 and Oracle 9.2 that really started to bring that whole experience for real application clusters, as it was later renamed, to the front. And so for me, Oracle 9, I always look fondly on, but Oracle 10, again, was the foundation. When I think people tend to forget about how good Oracle 10 was as a release. Certainly, the later releases of Oracle 10, and it formed the foundation. But you're right, everyone tends to remember either the version they just left over the version that is, spectacular. And in my world, Oracle 10, I remember spending so much time on, did so much work on, and it really, the functionality started to expand. It wasn't just about the database. All of the things that you're talking, the foundations for online operations, parallel, really became a powerful solution in that release. So for me, and I may be looking on with rose-tinted glasses, but Oracle 10, I think, is probably my favorite, release of the Oracle database, just in terms of what it basically meant from a functionality standpoint. But clearly, a kid that I'm working with at this moment also holds a lot of affection as well. So I've got a lot of affection for Oracle 23 as well. Yeah, Oracle 10, I think, probably, if you force man to say, what's your favorite release? Yeah. I don't think many people would say that, by the way. I think I may be in a small minority.
It's an interesting one because, it wouldn't be my pick. However, if someone had said to me, you can have Oracle 9 and the only thing we're adding is active session history and we're calling it Oracle 10, I would have still said that's worthy of a release.
Yeah.
I take your point. I do feel a bit sorry, for lack of a better term, for Oracle 10 in the sense that it almost suffered a bit from our own marketing chutzpah, in the sense that we said this is the database that automates everything. I remember you'll never need to tune another database again. And salespeople always have that generosity with their claims.
Yeah.
And that's part of the world of IT. But it's one of those things where, as a result, I think people were very quick to say, you've claimed 12 things, but you only deliver 11, as opposed to going, we've delivered 11 amazing things, but you didn't deliver the 12th.
12, yeah.
And certainly, out of all those things, active session history, I think, was the one that just absolutely blew my mind. And to this day, it's something like the only time you see people critical of Oracle licensing is they're going, the thing that they always bring up is, why can't Ash be in every release? So that just shows how how vital it is to people and how incredibly important it is.
Yeah.
I do agree that Oracle 10 was pretty cool and maybe gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes.
It does get a terrible bad rap, and I think there was we lose sight of the fact that it wasn't just that it introduced so many pieces of functionality. It also refined so many pieces of functionality. Partitioning, I think, really became a key, the powerhouse that it is today in Oracle 10. It became, if you're building a data warehouse, the partitioning functionality in Oracle 10 at that stage, from my perspective, again, really lent itself to, it was such a strong story at that stage. And again, it was a release that Oracle started to pull away from the rest of the industry. There were features in Oracle 10 that today many of our competitors still don't have. So that's why, in some respects, certainly as a product manager, I feel very fond of Oracle 10, because it was when Oracle started to put the foot on the accelerator in terms of functionality. And I can understand why some people say, well, did we really need all of the functionality that you had? Well, it was because customers were asking for it at that stage. But it was still lots and lots of fond memories for Oracle 10. Maybe I write a blog some stage about why I feel so strongly about Oracle 10.
So version 10, or 10G as it was known, holds a special place in Dom's heart. Do I agree? Do I have a different release number in mind for my favourite version of the Oracle database? We'll find out that when we continue our conversation with Dom in the next session. Thanks for listening to this podcast. The music credit goes to Zanman from Pixabay Music.